Once he's gone, it's ours. I froze in the kitchen doorway. My heart stopped. That voice, cold, certain, belonged to the man I once called my son-in-law, Brian. He didn't know I was there. He didn't know each word landed like a blade across my chest. I watched Emily, my daughter, bow her head and stay silent. No protest, no defense. In that instant I understood. It was planned. Me, the father who worked his whole life to give them everything, had become nothing more than an obstacle. I retreated to my room, sat in the dark, and listened to the clock tick like a countdown to the day they want me gone. But they were wrong. I am not finished, and I will not let them take what belongs to the woman I love most, my wife, Margaret. Once he's gone, it's ours. That phrase was the spark, and I am the fire that will burn every lie to ash. Stay, watch, because what I do next will make this family remember forever. I can still see it. Margaret's smile every morning, light and easy as an April sunbeam. This house, every brick, every frame of every window, carries our fingerprints. After 40 years together, I thought I'd learned everything there was to know about peace. When Emily married Brian, I cried, not out of sadness, out of joy. He spoke gently, always called me Dad, held my daughter's hand tight as they walked down the aisle. I thought, at last, she's found a man she can trust. Margaret was still alive then. She leaned over and whispered, "See? She picked the right one." At first, Brian acted like the perfect son-in-law. He mowed my lawn, patched the roof, even sat through Sunday baseball games with me. I trusted him like my own blood. When Margaret died of lung cancer, it was Brian who kept me from falling apart. He put an arm around my shoulders and said, "I'll take care of Emily for you," like her mother would have. Back then, those words felt like a balm. Now, looking back, they sound more like a claim. After the funeral, the house turned so quiet it scared me. Emily still came by, but each visit felt different. Everything she said began with, "Brian thinks," or "Brian says you should." I brushed it off. Newlyweds talk, I told myself. They plan things together. Until one October night, I woke up to a noise in the living room. Light spilled across Brian's face as he bent over my desk, flipping through my savings books. I stepped out. "What are you doing, Brian?" He looked up and smiled like nothing was wrong. "Oh, just making sure nobody's trying to scam you, Dad." But I saw it, the look in his eyes. Not concern, calculation, as if he were adding up my worth. The house, every dollar I'd saved for Emily. From that night on, I couldn't sleep. Little things I'd ignored began to stand out. Brian suggesting we sell the house because it was too big for an old man. Brian urging me to write a will just to be safe. Brian calling the bank himself, claiming to be representing the family. Whenever I pushed back, Emily would squeeze my hand and say, "Dad, Brian's only trying to help. He cares about you." This was the same girl who once cried in my arms, terrified of losing her mother, now trusting completely a man who was slowly stripping away my freedom. I stayed quiet. I didn't want to hurt her, didn't want her to choose between her husband and her father. But deep down, I could feel something cracking, not in the walls of this house, in the heart of my own family. And I never imagined that the moment I closed my eyes and let it slide was the very moment the first door swung open, inviting in a much larger tragedy waiting just beyond. After that night, something inside me changed. I started watching Brian more closely. The more I looked, the more I saw cracks I'd been too willing to ignore. He no longer came by out of affection. It was unfinished business now. Every visit, he brought a stack of papers, contracts, powers of attorney, even drafts of my will. He'd say to Emily right in front of me, "Your dad's getting older. Best to make everything clear now. Saves trouble later." It sounded reasonable, but his tone wasn't. It was cold. Calculated. One gray February afternoon, I was cleaning my study when I found a tiny USB drive under the desk. I didn't remember owning it. When I plugged it into my computer, it held scans of my property deed and a transfer of ownership, with my signature, but I had never signed it. The room spun. The signature looked perfect. Every stroke, every curve, someone had practiced it. That night I called Emily. She came with Brian. When I showed them the USB, Brian just shrugged. "Maybe you signed it and forgot." At your age, memory slips sometimes. Emily's eyes filled with worry and pity. Dad, are you okay? Do you want me to take you to a doctor? They stood there talking to me like I was some confused old man, and in that moment, I felt myself disappearing from my own life. Later that night, alone in my study, I stared at a photo of Margaret smiling by the window. She'd always believed our daughter would be my pride. But I knew, if she were alive, she would never believe in the way Brian looked after me. I began writing everything down, dates, times, what was said, what went missing, every tiny detail, not to fight them, not yet, but to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. Then one Monday morning, my neighbor Keller brought over an envelope. "I think you should see this, Richard. It got dropped in my mailbox by mistake." Inside was a copy of the contract selling the piece of land out by the lake, the land I'd bought for Margaret before she died. The final signature, again mine. My knees buckled, and in that instant I understood. What was being stolen wasn't just property, it was the last shred of trust a father had left. Through the window I saw Brian's car pulling away, his reflection in the glass, calm, confident, guiltless, and I made myself a promise. If they're waiting for me to be gone before they take it all, then I'll show them I'm still here, and I can still fight. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. The house was silent, listening, as if it wanted to know what I would do with this new certainty. This wasn't clumsy concern anymore. This was a plan. I brewed coffee, opened the notebook I'd been keeping for weeks. Dates, times, details. Last night's line still fresh. USB, deed scan, forged signature. Underneath, double underlined, neighbor Keller, land contract, wrong address. I started making calls. First, the bank. I asked for 12 months of printed statements, and for them to flag every transaction tied to my property. The rep hesitated. "Mr. Walker, your file shows a family power of attorney, but it allows your son-in-law to access basic information." I said nothing, thanked her, hung up. Power of attorney? I'd never signed one. By noon, I was at the notary office where Margaret and I had drawn up our will years ago. Same cream walls, same smell of old paper, same hum of the printer. When I asked about the power of attorney, the secretary's eyes widened. She clicked through her files. "Yes, there's a document, signed 3 months ago. Signature reads Richard A. Walker." I asked to see it. When the paper slid across the desk, my heart dropped. The signature looked perfect, except for one thing. The tiny dot I always place off to the left was on the right. They'd practiced my hand. They didn't know my quirks. "I didn't sign this," I said. She bit her lip. "Sir, the file was notarized by an off-hours notary, so he had a scheduling conflict. There's a camera at the reception desk, but not in the private signing room." I asked for the footage. She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll request permission." That afternoon I went to see Keller. Former firefighter. Straight shooter. Few words. I told him about the land contract, about the USB. He scratched his chin. "I've seen Brian at the mailbox a lot. Weird thing is, he always glances at mine before his." "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. Keller sighed. "I didn't want to meddle in family business. But that contract, that's too far." He rummaged in a drawer and handed me a slip of paper. Brian's license plate number, penciled weeks ago. "I figured you might need it." That night Emily called. Her voice shook. "Dad, Brian says, please don't run around stirring up trouble. He thinks someone's taking advantage of you." I swallowed hard. "Sweetheart, I'm just checking some records. And there are documents with my signature I've never signed." Silence. Then, "Brian says, maybe you forgot." Those 2 words, "maybe forgot," cut deeper than any accusation. I didn't argue. In war, you don't fire blindly in the dark. You wait for daylight. You aim. I needed proof, not arguments. So I changed the lock on my study. I planted a micro recorder under the dining room table, a gadget an old engineer friend had given me years ago. I hated doing this in my own home, but the truth would no longer live only in my memory. It would have a voice. The next morning, Brian came over, walked straight to the fridge like it was his. I pretended to forget about the recorder, poured him a glass of water. He smiled. "Brought some papers for you to sign. Just routine." "What papers?" I asked. "Updating the will, just in case." I looked into his eyes, saw the rush under the calm. "Leave them here," I said. "We'll go through them when Emily's around." After he left, I pressed play on the recorder. His voice came through, clear as glass, talking to someone on the porch. "He's starting to suspect. Move up the schedule." A faint reply, mosquito thin. Friday, 10 a.m., Old Notary Office. I froze. Friday, 10 a.m., a chalk line drawn down my spine. I closed the door to my study, opened the old safe, and pulled out the real will, the one Margaret and I had signed 7 years ago. Her clause still there. Every asset would go into the Margaret Walker Foundation until any heir proved their competence and integrity through 5 years of unpaid stewardship. I tucked it into my inner jacket pocket, felt like I was carrying Margaret's heart against my chest. As the dark crept over the roof, I knew I'd stepped onto their battlefield. But I also knew something else. I was no longer just an old man watering flowers and remembering his wife. I was Richard A. Walker, the man who built bridges across deep chasms. And now I would build one for myself, across this pit. With the truth, it rained on Thursday. Before I went to the notary, I stopped by the office of Harper, a lawyer in her 40s, sharp and composed. I'd been referred to her by an old friend. What I needed wasn't a loud gavel, it was a razor-sharp blade that could cut clean. She listened as I laid it out. The power of attorney, the USB, the recording. Her eyes widened where the paper trail grew thick. "Mr. Richard," Harper said, "we need two things. Preserve the assets, and preserve your legal credibility. Nobody wants to hear an old man losing it tell a courtroom about a conspiracy." I nodded. She immediately drafted a motion to temporarily freeze any legal changes to my assets and a letter to the bank revoking any authorizations granted without my consent. "I'll file it first thing tomorrow, before 9. "What about the cameras?" I asked. Harper smiled thinly. "I'll subpoena the footage. If they refuse, the court will force compliance." She paused. "You must stay calm in front of Emily. We want her as a potential witness, not an adversary." I understood. Every bridge has a fragile span. I couldn't be the one to break it. That afternoon I invited Emily over for dinner. I made her favorite, chicken and mushroom stew, something she loved as a child. Brian came too. I didn't stop them. They sat across from me, steam rising from the plates. I told stories. The time Emily learned to ride a bike and Margaret ran behind, steadying the seat while I ran in front with open arms, saying, "Aim for me." My eyes got wet as I spoke. Emily's chopsticks paused. Brian smiled the polite smile. I pushed a sealed envelope across the table, a photocopy of the true will I'd just had copied. I said slowly, "This will is still valid. It leaves nothing to anyone who cannot show integrity." Brian flipped the edge of the envelope, then let it drop. "Don't make this difficult," he said. "We're family." "Family," I repeated, "does not forge one another's signatures." The silence hit like stone. Emily looked up, panic in her eyes. "Dad, what are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I stood, cleared the plates, and left them to sit with the words I dropped like hailstones. That night I moved a box of crucial documents to Keller's house and asked him to hold them for safekeeping. I also installed a simple intrusion alert on my study, a sensor cheap enough to be innocuous, accurate enough to tell me who came in while I was away. My hands didn't shake doing it. Maybe it was Margaret's presence at my shoulder, steadying me. Friday morning, I stood outside the notary at 9:30. The rain had stopped. The world felt scrubbed clean. Harper arrived, efficient, handing me a court-stamped copy of our filings. "We've got our first layer of armor," she said. At 9:58, the doors opened. Brian came in with a man in a gray suit, mid-50s, tie tight, confidence carved across his face like a permanent grin. I melted back behind a pillar while Harper moved to the reception desk and smiled a practiced smile. Brian didn't notice me. He walked up and lowered his voice to the clerk. "We're scheduled for 10, room 2. Harper produced the paperwork at once. "I'm sorry. Any transaction involving Mr. Richard Walker's assets is currently stayed by court order. We ask the notary to comply." The air thickened. Brian blinked, then managed his smile. "We're only here to update contact information," he said. Harper didn't yield. "Contact information is frozen too. The court's order was signed at 8:47 this morning." I stepped forward then. Brian's mask faltered. The gray-suited man snapped his head around and sized me up. "Good morning," I said. "I hear there's a 10 o'clock appointment here." Brian's voice turned honey smooth. "What are you doing here? I'm handling things for you, Dad." "No more handling," I said. No more helping. From now on, everything goes through my attorney. I turned to the clerk. Please print every appointment with my name for the last 3 months. Behind me, Harper tapped out a message. I knew she was alerting the court clerk. They left together, Brian's jaw working. The veneer was cracking. That afternoon, my phone rang off the hook. Emily, then Emily again. I let it go to voicemail. I sat and watched the blinds tremble in the breeze, thinking of the bridges I used to design. They didn't collapse from the strongest wind. They failed from a repeated, matched vibration, a rhythm that kept eating at the joints. I needed to break Brian's rhythm, the one-step-ahead cadence that let him rewrite our life. That evening, Harper emailed. The notary's reception footage was scheduled for release, and she'd arranged for a handwriting expert to examine the signature. Her message ended with, "Prepare for the next step. Signature forensics." I replied simply, "Good. Tomorrow I'll set the trap." On Saturday, I called Brian. "You free tomorrow? I need you to look over some of your mother's old papers." His voice shifted instantly. "Sure. I'll come by." I added, "Ask Emily to be here too." While I waited, I set the study like a scene laid out by fate. On the desk, a forged will, a copy I'd prepared on purpose with a barely visible typo, Margaret Laker instead of Walker, and a blank for the signature. Beside it, my fountain pen, the one I always used. But I'd filled it with ink that would blur when treated with the forensic lab's revealing solution. On the bookshelf, a tiny camera pointed straight at the desk, tucked behind a cactus. Under the table, the micro recorder lay asleep, fully charged. Sunday afternoon they arrived. I poured tea and put on Margaret's favorite track on Pandora. Memory makes people soft, that's the point. I slid the old will across the table. Brian put on his glasses and leaned in. I said casually, "Maybe we should just sign this again. Make everything tidy." A flicker passed through Brian's eyes like a predator spotting prey. He turned to Emily. "If Dad's ready, that's fine. Let's make it clear." Emily bit her lip. "If that's what you want, Dad." I nudged the paper and the pen toward Brian. "My eyes aren't the best these days. Would you proof it for me?" He nodded and leaned over, exactly where I wanted him. On the camera, I'd later watch his hands trace every line, skim past the typo as if it were invisible, and, this was the crucial moment, he marked an X in the blank where a signature should go, a habit I never had. "Sign here, Dad," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Here?" Just loud enough for the mic to catch him. "Yes, here." I didn't sign. I stood as if to get my glasses, but my real intent was to trigger the door sensor, to log the time. Coming back, I found them there, frozen over the paper. "I'm tired," I said. "Let's finish tomorrow." Brian swallowed his impatience, hiding it under a smile. "Whatever you want, Dad." They left. 5 minutes later, Harper texted, "Forensics scheduled Monday morning. Bring any recent writing instruments from the subject." I looked at the fountain pen. There was still a smear of wet ink where Brian's finger had brushed it as he made that little X. I slipped the pen and the paper into an envelope and sealed it. That night, Emily messaged me privately. "Dad, I'm sorry about these past weeks. I don't know who to trust." I answered, "You don't have to trust anyone. You just have to see." I sent her a short clip. Brian's voice from the kitchen. "Move up the schedule." Her phone rang a minute later. "Dad, is this real?" she cried. "Come tomorrow without Brian. I'll be there." Monday morning at the county handwriting lab, the air smelled of solvents and copier toner. A silver-haired specialist took my envelope, set a loop over her eye, and got to work. She dusted, she applied reagents, she leaned in. "What do you have?" she asked. I handed her the pen and the marked paper. She worked steadily. "This writer lifts the pen in the same way at the end of a stroke, leaving a tiny hairline of ink in the opposite direction. Very distinctive." She compared that habitual lift to the signatures on the power of attorney and the land sale. Same guiding marks, same deliberate inking, not you. My chest tightened like a spring. "Can you state that in a report?" "Yes. I'll prepare a forensic certification." On my way out, I met Harper. She handed me an email she'd just received from the notary. The reception camera clearly showed a masked man picking up documents. Not me. "The angle isn't ideal, but with cross-referencing we can ID him," she said. "The private signing room has no camera, but there's a sign-in log." The booking name? Brian. I closed my eyes for a second. The puzzle fit. One piece left. Motive. Something the court could not ignore. Harper leaned in. The motive is money, the house. But we need the trail. Suspicious notary fees, ghost legal invoices, seeded emails. I nodded. Tonight, I said, I will open the last door. I'd set the table, put out my pieces, proof, camera, testimony. They thought they were the ones moving pawns. They were wrong. I hadn't come here for revenge. I'd come for preservation. For Margaret. For the truth. And now, with one more hinge to pry open, I would show them everything. The signatures, the men in suits, the quiet appointments booked like trapdoors. I would make sure the court saw the pattern. Not an old man's failing mind, but a deliberate campaign of theft and deceit. Tonight, I told myself, I would open that final door. Monday night, I asked Emily to come over. She arrived alone, eyes red. I brewed tea and said nothing. I set a small projector on the table and pressed play. Up came the footage from my study, Brian's hands marking the X, his voice telling me where to sign. Emily covered her mouth. I didn't want to believe, but her voice cracked. I didn't hug her. Not now. A hug would be a hiding place. Do you know the password to Brian's work email? I asked gently. Dad? I can't. She hesitated. I nodded. Then just check the family account you two share. She wavered, then opened her phone. On the screen, a parade of subject lines. Appointment 10 a.m., draft transfer, POA template. Each one another knife. I didn't take screenshots. I didn't download. I only said, write them down. Date, time, title. Don't forward anything. We do this by the book. Suddenly my phone buzzed, my study's sensor. Motion alert. Someone was inside while Emily and I were in the living room. I signaled for silence. We crept to the doorway and peered through the crack. Brian, using a spare key Emily didn't know existed, heading straight for my study. Emily's face went pale. What is he doing here? I didn't answer. I tapped the remote, started the recorder from a distance, and waited. 5 minutes. 10. Brian emerged, a bundle of papers tucked under his arm. The fake will I'd left out on purpose. He slipped it into his bag, glanced around, and left quietly. When the door clicked shut, Emily slumped into a chair. Who did I marry, Dad? She whispered. Her question hit the floor like a glass breaking. I called Harper. The trap sprung, I said. She arrived within 15 minutes with a county officer she knew, someone with judicial authority. I laid it all out, the sensor, the timestamps, the video, the audio. The officer nodded. Enough to seek an emergency warrant if we show those documents were taken for criminal use. Harper added the fresh handwriting report, the notary schedule, the email titles Emily had logged. A complete chain, she said. We'll file at dawn. That night I sat on the porch. The sky was thick ink. I thought of Margaret. I'm leading her across the bridge, Maggie. Not for revenge, for her to see clearly. Inside, Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, still clutching the notebook of dates and email titles. 5:40 a.m. Harper texted, warrant granted. 7:10 a.m. The police quietly entered Brian's second apartment, the address Keller had tipped me off about. The door swung open. Inside, a warm paper shredder, a jammed stack of sheets, top page showing the same Laker typo, and more, a folder labeled POA Pack, templates for power of attorney, with instructions on how to sign for seniors. Brian went pale. He said 3 words. Where's my lawyer? At the station, Harper appeared, not to question but to file a motion. Request to preserve all assets and void any legal changes made under fraudulent signatures. The officer turned to me. You want to press charges right now? I shook my head. I want justice to follow its path, and I want Emily to see the truth in court. That afternoon, Emily came to the kitchen, where it had all begun. She cried, but this time it was the cry of someone waking up, not someone naive. Dad, she said through tears, I'm sorry I let him stand between us. I put my hand over hers. No one stands between us if we stand next to each other. Late that night, Brian sent a single text. You'll regret this. I stared at the screen, feeling no anger. Only the image of a man so far down the path of greed he thought regret was something he could force on others. I powered off my phone, opened a drawer, took out Margaret's handwritten note. If the day comes when this house is no longer safe, make it the place where justice begins. I taped the letter inside the lid of my evidence box like a flag. Tomorrow we would step into the light, face them openly, and then I would no longer be the old man dismissed as confused. I would be the witness to my own life, the voice of the woman who was gone, and the last wall between my daughter and the abyss. The clock struck midnight. The storm had arrived, and I, clear-eyed, steady, with evidence lined up like rivets, waited for dawn. I didn't want a scene. I just wanted everyone to hear, once, clearly. Because truth, when buried too long, grows heavy, and someday it cracks under its own weight. So I invited them, relatives, neighbors, a few of Margaret's old friends, to a small gathering for my grandson's birthday. The venue, the church community hall where Margaret used to attend service, a place filled with memories. And the perfect place to speak about family, openly. I arrived early. The room was cool, smelling faintly of candles and cake. I set a small suitcase under the table. Inside, the recorder, document copies, and one small speaker ready to play the phone call where Brian's voice said, "Move up the schedule." I knew the plan by heart. No shouting, no drama. Just facts, evidence, and silence long enough for the truth to echo. More people showed than I expected. Emily stood near the back, pale and tight-lipped. Brian looked flawless as ever, the perfect smile masking a rotten tooth. He greeted everyone, put a hand on shoulders, joked easily. I caught the neighbors' glances. The poor old man's lost it. Familiar look. People always trust the sweet talk over the sound of doubt. When it began, I spoke briefly. "Thank you all for coming. I just want to speak the truth today." I laid a copy of the will on the table and handed Harper, my lawyer, a marked folder. She stood beside me, calm as steel. I took a breath, then pressed play. Brian's voice filled the room, smooth and cold. "Move up the schedule. Friday, 10 o'clock, Old Notary Office." The room went silent. Someone gasped. Someone blinked too fast. Emily clutched her arms, trembling. Before Brian could react, I continued. "This was recorded the night I found him in my living room." One by one, I displayed the documents. The land contract, the forged savings scans, the handwriting report, every mismatched pen stroke, every inconsistent mark. Brian's jaw tightened. "You're trying to smear me," he barked. "Richard, this is family. How dare you drag us into a public circus?" I met his gaze. "Family?" I said quietly. "Family doesn't forge signatures to steal a home." My voice wasn't angry anymore. It was forged, tempered. "We have notarized proof, your pen, your recordings, and witnesses who saw you collect the papers. If you want to call it defamation, let the court decide. But here, in front of everyone, know this: you've played the good man long enough." A cousin spoke up, furious and ashamed. "Brian, say something." He forced a smile. "He's confused. He's making this up. The old man's lost track." Emily stood, shaking. "Brian," she started, then stopped when our eyes met. Tears blurred her face, caught between husband and father. The silence that followed felt alive. Then Keller, my neighbor, stepped forward. "I saw you at my mailbox," he said evenly. "I saw you pick up mail. I wrote down your license plate. I'll testify." Soft applause broke out, hesitant, uneasy. Some whispered about the notary. Others said, "Let the court handle it." Brian switched tactics. He turned to Emily, his tone pleading now. "Everything I did was for our future. Your dad isn't well. We needed to make things secure." Emily stared at him, torn. I saw the crack widen in her face, the fracture between love and truth. I didn't want her broken by this. I didn't want a witch hunt. But sometimes, to free a soul trapped in lies, you have to open every window and let the light burn through. When it ended, I didn't shout. I just stood there, tired but steady. Brian left the room furious, though quieter than I expected. He knew too much of this had already slipped beyond his control. Emily came up and gripped my hand. "Dad, I don't know what to do." I looked at her, then at Margaret's photo on the table. That faint smile that always felt like a command. Do what's right. That night, word spread fast. A few neighbors called, checking if I was all right. Others avoided me. But the important thing was this. No one could say Richard A. Walker stayed silent and surrendered. I had spoken, and that first word, small as a seed, had already begun to take root. The next morning I thought things might settle. They didn't. My phone rang non-stop. A cousin's voice, tight and nervous. "Uncle Richard, Brian's saying you made the whole thing up to blackmail him. Are you sure you're okay?" The question landed like a punch to the chest. I understood. His counterattack had begun. I turned on the TV. On a relative's Facebook page, a post was spreading fast. Sad to see an old man lose his mind and hurt his own children. Beneath it, a photo of me from yesterday's party. Someone had filmed the whole thing, and I didn't have to guess who. That afternoon, Brian called. His voice was cool, confident. "Dad, I think you should stop. Things can still be quiet. If you keep going, Emily's the one who'll get hurt. I just want one thing, an apology." I let out a low laugh. "An apology? For you forging my signature?" "There's no forgery," he said. "You have nothing that holds up in court. A few recordings, a few printed pages. Come on, Dad, who do you think they'll believe? A confused old man or a respected businessman?" Then the line went dead, leaving that sterile tone in my ear. I sat there for a long time. Every word he'd said cut deep, but I didn't feel pain. Only clarity. This was just round one. 3 days later, Brian hosted what he called a clarification. He rented out a fancy cafe, invited relatives, even hired a local reporter. "I want transparency," he told them. "I love my father-in-law like my own father, but he's showing signs of confusion. I worry about him." A few nodded. Some looked at me with pity. I walked in without invitation, carrying a thin folder. I let him speak, all of it. He was good. So good that if I were a stranger, I might have believed him myself. Every sentence fit neatly together. He forgot to sign. He mixed up papers. He needs help. Then it was my turn. I opened the folder and held up a stamped report. "The truth doesn't need to shout," I said quietly. "This is the official forensic report." The person who signed those documents, the power of attorney and the property transfer, was not me. A wave of murmurs filled the room. Brian's face drained, then reset itself into calm. "Forensics can be wrong," he said. "He's stuck in old methods. It's easy to misread." From behind me, Harper stepped forward, voice steady and clear. "This report is legally binding, and more importantly, we have proof the appointment made under the name Richard Walker that day was booked by Brian Anderson. The notary's security footage has been sealed as evidence." The room froze. Brian's jaw tightened. He turned to Emily, desperate now. "Do you believe them? Do you believe your father over your husband?" Emily trembled, eyes glistening, and when she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "I believe in the truth, and the truth doesn't ask me to pick sides." Brian staggered a step. His words cracked. "You don't understand. Everything I did was for you, for our future." "He's old, Emily. He doesn't even know what this property is worth." I met his gaze and smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm old, but I still know the value of honesty. And it's worth more than anything you're chasing." A woman from the family called out, "Brian, do you have anything to prove you're innocent?" He looked around, lips pressed tight, then snapped, "I don't need to prove anything. I'm part of this family." The words hung in the air like a confession. Silence. Heavy. Unforgiving. Emily turned away, tears spilling, and walked out. I followed quietly. Outside, rain began to fall. She turned, threw her arms around me, sobbing hard. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I've been blind for too long." I stroked her hair and whispered, "It's all right, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to lose all your faith to finally find the light again." That night, I knew I'd won the first round. Not because anyone believed me, but because Emily finally believed herself. 3 days after the family meeting, I thought Brian might finally stay quiet. But liars never retreat when cornered. When they feel everything slipping away, they bite. That afternoon, tires screeched outside my gate. Brian stormed in, face flushed, eyes bloodshot. "You trying to destroy me?" he shouted. Before I could answer, he threw a stack of papers onto the table. A countersuit, accusing me of defamation, fabrication, and deliberate damage to reputation. I looked at the document and asked simply, "You want to take this to court? Good. I've been waiting for that." Brian sneered, his voice twisting. "You think you can beat me? I've got lawyers, friends, credibility, and you're just an old man lost in his fantasies." I stepped closer, slow and steady. I don't need credibility. I have the truth. And the truth, I said, doesn't age. He slammed his fist on the table. A crack like thunder through the room. Emily burst in, startled. Brian! What are you doing? He turned on her, voice sharp with rage. So you're against me now? You're taking his side? She took a breath. I'm taking the side that's right. For the first time, she didn't flinch. She stood between us, small but unwavering. And in that moment, I saw strength in my daughter that I'd spent years trying to find again in myself. Brian's glare cut cold as steel. He lunged toward the file cabinet, yanking drawers open, searching for documents. But what he didn't know was that I'd already replaced every real file with copies. The papers he was crumpling in his fists were blank. I let him. Sometimes the guilty need to expose themselves so the world can see who they really are. Stop it, Brian, Emily screamed. He turned, voice cracking. You don't understand, I'm doing this for us. No, I said evenly. You're doing it for your greed. At that moment, Keller, my neighbor, entered with 2 county officers. I'd called ahead, knowing this might happen. Behind them was Harper, calm as ever, holding a document in her hand. Mr. Brian Anderson, she said, voice hard as stone, by order of the county court, you are prohibited from contacting or approaching Mr. Richard Walker pending investigation into signature forgery and financial fraud. Brian froze, his face drained of color. He set me up, he shouted, pointing at me. I didn't move. No, Brian, I said quietly. You set yourself up. He tore himself free, slammed the door behind him, and vanished into the storm. Emily collapsed into a chair, shaking. I rested my hand on her shoulder. You see, sweetheart, the truth doesn't need to shout. It just has to stand still long enough for the liar to trip over it. That night the house was silent except for rain tapping the roof. I sat in the living room, replaying the recording from earlier. Brian's shouts, the tearing of paper, Harper's voice reading the restraining order. All of it preserved, one more piece of the case. I sent a copy to Harper, another to the police, and kept one for myself. Not out of spite, but because I knew this was only the beginning. Brian wouldn't stop. He'd strike back. Maybe through lawyers, maybe through the media. But this time, I was ready. Because justice isn't the moment punishment lands. It's the moment evil realizes it can no longer fool anyone. I looked up at Margaret's photo on the wall and managed a tired smile. You see, Maggie, I kept my promise. No one touches what we built. Lightning split the sky outside. The storm hadn't passed, but now I knew I was facing the right direction. When the public showdown faded, I knew the real battle was only beginning. Not at a dinner table, not in a living room, but in places I'd spent my whole life avoiding. Courts, banks, law offices. I'd built houses with rulers and pencils. Now I had to learn the language of seals, injunctions, and words like subpoena, freeze order, conservatorship. Harper took command. Our first meeting, she said, we need 2 things: freeze every legal change and trace the money. That same day, she filed a Mareva injunction with the county court, a motion to halt all property transfers under my name, Richard A. Walker. If the assets move, she explained, we may never get them back. We act now, or we lose. I signed, knowing even my own signature had become something to guard. Harper also petitioned for a full banking disclosure, 24 months of statements for every account in my name, every transfer within 6 months, and any transaction tied to Anderson Holdings, Brian's company. I'll never forget the first number Martinez, the forensic auditor, read aloud, $245,000. A cluster of small wire transfers into Brian's corporate account over 3 months. Not huge by white-collar standards, but enough to buy the suburban land Margaret once loved. Then came the warrants. Harper secured a court order to seize original documents from 2 of Brian's properties, the rental apartment and a front office labeled Anderson Financial Services. Police and digital forensics arrived together. They found a still-warm paper shredder, an external hard drive, and a notebook scrawled with POA templates, how to guide. Each discovery another shard of the mosaic coming into focus. The handwriting was the next battlefield. Harper worked with the county's forensic lab. The official report confirmed it. The signatures on the power of attorney and property deed were not mine. The document came with a meticulous side-by-side analysis, pen lifts, stroke pressure, microscopic ink drags, details I'd never noticed, now the very things saving my name. When Harper presented the report in preliminary hearing, the judge's face darkened. "There is sufficient cause to continue investigation," he said. The freeze order was extended. Meanwhile, Martinez, our forensic accountant, started untangling Brian's financial web. She traced every transaction, cross-checked timestamps on scanned PDFs, and extracted file metadata. Brian's empire unraveled line by line. Fake consulting invoices, shell payments disguised as business expenses, and $72,500 withdrawn in cash, rerouted through a friend's account. She pointed to the screen. "See this? The metadata shows all the scans were created on the same day, but the signatures were layered in later. Digital proof, the kind that cuts through even the loudest lies." I expected Brian to fight back with lawsuits, slander, defamation, moral damages. Right on cue, he filed a claim for $50,000 in reputational harm. Harper only smirked. "He's trying to wear us down. Let him." The longer he fights, the more he bleeds evidence. We filed a counterclaim, demanding restitution for financial loss and a criminal investigation into forgery and fraud. Next came the electronic front. Harper subpoenaed Brian's email host and the domain registrar for Anderson Holdings. We retrieved a chain of internal emails, subject lines like "move up the schedule," "stamping protocol," "funds route," "offshore." Each one carried a digital fingerprint, IP addresses, timestamps, all matching Brian's own phone location data. When Harper printed the log, every line felt like a nail driven through his defense. But Brian didn't stay still. He hired an aggressive litigator known for procedural warfare, flooding the docket with motions for psychiatric evaluation, challenges to my mental competence, whispers that I was losing clarity. They reached out to neighbors, hinting at trouble, pressing witnesses to withdraw. Some caved out of fear, others simply looked away. That, more than any insult, broke my heart, watching fear eat away at truth. Yet each move he made, Harper countered precisely: restraining orders, witness subpoenas, court sanctions for intimidation. And Martinez kept digging. Of the $245,000 in transfers, at least $120,000 traced back to fraudulent services, roundabout payments to hide legal fees and buy silence. This round of war had no shouting, no slammed doors. Only documents and seals, ink and timestamps. Each page, each signature, each frozen account was another rivet sealing the coffin of his deceit. I realized then, to reclaim justice, sometimes you have to fight with their weapons. Not emotion, not anger, but law, logic, and precision. By the time this phase ended, Brian's mask had cracked wide open. The phantom invoices, the offshore accounts, the trail of helpers covering his tracks. He hadn't been convicted yet, but he was bound, trapped in a growing stack of evidence waiting for daylight. And me. I had just set my biggest machine in motion: justice, powered by the law. The first preliminary hearing was set for Monday, 9 a.m. I arrived early, in the same gray suit Margaret had pressed for me the day we signed the mortgage on our first home. The polished wood, the echo of shoes on stone, it all made my heart beat faster. Across the room sat Brian, next to his lawyer, a silver-haired man with a face carved out of ice, hand resting on a black leather briefcase. At my table were Harper and Martinez, calm, sharp, precise, like two slender blades. Judge Jenkins entered, voice low but commanding. "This court convenes for a temporary hearing in Richard A. Walker versus Brian Anderson concerning allegations of signature forgery and misappropriation of assets." Brian rose, all poise and performance. "Your Honor, I was only trying to help my father-in-law protect his estate. He's been showing signs of confusion. We merely sought temporary guardianship to prevent further losses." His lawyer slid forward a folder labeled "Guardianship Petition," a formal request to have Brian appointed as my legal conservator due to diminished cognitive capacity. I couldn't help a small laugh. I'd seen this move coming. Harper stepped up and handed in our response. "Your Honor, please review the neurological report from Dr. Feldman, a licensed specialist. He certifies that my client is fully competent and exhibits no cognitive decline. Furthermore, here is the forensic handwriting analysis confirming that the plaintiff's signature was forged. The guardianship filing is a clear attempt to conceal fraudulent activity." Brian interrupted, voice raised. "They're splicing evidence. Those files aren't legitimate. Harper didn't respond. She simply nodded to Martinez. The forensic accountant opened her laptop and mirrored the display on the courtroom screen. Your Honor, she said evenly, these are digital metadata logs from the defendant's seized computer. Every file labeled POA template.pdf was created on the same device, at the same time, with the signature inserted later through editing software. On the screen, the cursor highlighted the line, Created, 2025, 02, 13, 09:24 a.m. Modified, 2025, 02, 13, 09:45 a.m. A long, heavy silence filled the courtroom. Judge Jenkins leaned back, then looked from Brian to me. The court finds sufficient cause to continue the investigation. The motion for temporary guardianship is denied. The gavel came down, sharp, final, and sweeter than any victory shout. Brian stormed out, face flushed red, but he wasn't finished. He moved to a dirtier game, intimidation. 3 days later, Keller called me, his voice tense. Someone came by, said if I kept quiet, they'd forget about the mailbox mix-up. I asked, "Were you afraid?" He exhaled. "No, but they should know. I'm a retired firefighter." I don't scare easy. Harper filed an immediate motion for witness protection. The next morning, the police called me to sign an addendum to my statement confirming the threat. A sealed warrant went out that afternoon. Soon after, Brian was questioned directly about sending someone to speak with Keller. He denied it, until Martinez produced an internal email retrieved from his backup server, "Need Keller to back off. Offer incentive if needed." The header showed an IP address, his home network. When Harper handed it to the judge, I saw his brow tighten. That night, Brian appeared at my doorstep. No yelling this time, just desperation. "Dad," he said softly, "I messed up. I just want things back to normal. If you withdraw the case, I'll return everything." I looked at him, calm. "Can you return trust, Brian?" He said nothing. I stepped aside. "Don't come here again. If you have any honor left, meet me in court." When the door closed behind him, I knew Harper was already preparing the final strike, the full forensic report. Martinez had found the nail in the coffin. Every illegal transfer was authenticated with Brian's digital signature, Brian A. Auth, traced to his verified home IP. Impossible to fake. The next morning, Harper filed the report with the court alongside a motion to open a full criminal trial on charges of document forgery and organized financial fraud. For years I thought justice lived in law books, distant, abstract. But when I saw that red court seal stamped on the report, I understood. Justice doesn't shout. It arrives quietly, through numbers, through evidence, through things no liar can erase. Brian still had cards to play. He'd spread rumors, twist the media, try to drown us in noise. But the net was tightening, and this time it was woven from the threads of law, not tears. The second preliminary hearing was packed wall to wall. On the other side, Brian sat hollow-cheeked, eyes still burning with that feral gleam. His lawyer, confident as ever, rose first. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "while there may have been technical discrepancies, there is no evidence of deliberate fraud. This is merely a misunderstanding, a family dispute over asset management." The judge said nothing for a long moment. Then he turned toward Harper. "Counsel for the plaintiff?" Harper didn't rise immediately. She opened her case file slowly, deliberately, and withdrew a brown envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, its edges yellowed with time, the handwriting slanted and delicate. "Margaret A. Walker." The room went utterly still. I bowed my head. This was Margaret's move, the final safeguard I had kept sealed for years. Harper's voice was calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "This is a supplemental letter of testament, notarized independently in 2018 by the firm Bennett Cole. The original was stored in a secure deposit box and may only be opened in the event of a family dispute. In it, Mrs. Margaret Walker specifies, if any family member is found to have unlawfully attempted to appropriate family assets, the entire estate shall be transferred to the Margaret Walker Charitable Foundation, and her husband shall be the sole person authorized to activate this clause." She paused, eyes fixed on Brian. "This clause is handwritten and certified by 2 witnesses, one of whom is still alive today." Brian shot to his feet, shouting, "Forgery! He made it up, all of it, to steal back the property." Harper didn't flinch. The original remains secured at First Federal Bank with a notarized chain of custody log. What I hold here is a verified duplicate from that archive, complete with digital verification code. The court may authenticate it now. The judge gestured to the clerk. Within minutes, the screen displayed. Authentic, verified signature, 2018. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Jenkins nodded slowly. The court acknowledges the validity of the charitable trust clause. Effective immediately, all assets under the name Richard A. Walker are to be placed under protective custody and temporarily administered by the Margaret Walker Foundation until the criminal case concludes. Brian's face went pale. The silence that followed felt almost physical, pressing against the walls. I looked at him, not with anger, but with an emptiness I hadn't known before. The emptiness of watching someone exile himself from his own family in pursuit of greed, but it wasn't over yet. 3 days later, Harper called, her tone sharp. "Mr. Walker, you need to come to the bank. Someone's attempting to transfer funds from the reserve account." When I arrived, the surveillance feed was already up. Brian, in the same worn suit, signing the electronic authorization pad, but this time security had been warned. Police moved in before the transaction could complete. He shouted as they pulled his hands behind his back. "It's all mine! I deserve it!" I stood a few steps away, watching him thrash under the flash of cameras. There was nothing left to say. That evening, Harper came by my house and set a document on the table, the temporary court order. All assets of Richard A. Walker are hereby preserved under judicial protection. The freeze remains in effect pending criminal prosecution. The Margaret Walker Foundation is now in full legal operation. I sat there for a long time, the house quiet except for the wind stirring the curtains. On the wall, Margaret's photograph trembled slightly in its frame. I reached up, straightened it, and smiled. "You see, Maggie, in the end, the law stood with the truth." That night, for the first time in months, I slept without waking, not because Brian was finally behind bars, but because the promise I made to the woman I loved had at last been kept. The story spread like wildfire. Son-in-law accused of forging father-in-law's signature to seize family estate. At first, it was just a few short lines buried in the legal life section of the local paper. But when a reporter dug deeper, found the name Margaret Walker Foundation and the property records attached, the spark became a blaze. Suddenly I was everywhere. They called me the 68-year-old man who stood up against betrayal in his own family. A headline I never imagined would belong to me. I didn't want fame. But in this world, justice moves slower than the news. And if I wanted to protect the truth, I had to step into the light myself. Harper arranged an exclusive interview with the Tribune. Beforehand, she told me, "Say only what you know for sure. No anger, no insults. Let the truth do the talking." The reporter was young, calm eyes, a soft voice. "Mr. Walker," she asked, "why speak out now, knowing it might tear your family apart?" I took a breath before answering. "Because silence doesn't save anyone. I kept quiet to protect my daughter, and that silence almost cost her everything." The article went live Monday morning. Within 24 hours, thousands of shares. Comment sections overflowed. Anger, empathy, disbelief. The greed of family has no limit. This man deserves respect. Proof that justice still exists. But Brian didn't stay quiet for long. The next day, he hired a major PR firm. Suddenly, counter-stories appeared. Businessman defamed by father-in-law. The real truth behind the Walker lawsuit. In his video interview, he sat in a leather chair, voice measured, smile rehearsed. "I love this family," he said. "I only wanted to protect my father-in-law's assets from opportunists. Maybe someone's been influencing him." Harper watched the clip and gave a thin smile. "He's playing the sympathy card," she said. "But we can flip the script." She sent a carefully worded email to our legal media team. Authorize the release of select forensic evidence. Nothing confidential, just enough for the public to see. The next evening, a national station aired the segment. Forensic analysis confirms forgery in Walker-Anderson case. The footage showed two signatures side by side, one real, one fake, enlarged on screen. A digital scan revealed the layered ink patterns and timestamps. The truth spoke louder than any press release. Brian snapped. He went on live television, slamming his hand on the table. "It's all lies. They're turning me into a villain. I have proof." The host tilted her head. "Would you like to show that proof now, Mr. Anderson?" Silence. The camera zoomed in, sweat on his forehead, eyes darting, mouth trembling. That image spread across social media within hours, chopped into 100 clips, replayed a million times. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I felt something heavy, the ache of seeing the truth crush someone I once called family. Because behind every angry comment, every headline was my daughter, reading words about her husband, about me. Still, I knew. Sometimes to defend the truth, you have to let go of the illusions that once felt like love. 3 days later, Harper received a call from a national network. They wanted to film a feature titled Family Justice: When Blood Turns Against You. Harper turned to me. Are you ready? I nodded slowly. If I don't tell this story, someone else will tell it for me. And when they do, I want them to remember Margaret, not for what she left behind, but for the faith she had in the truth. The special feature aired Friday night, prime time. The whole city seemed to pause to watch. Title: The Walker Case: When Family Betrayal Meets Justice. I sat in a modest studio set, wearing the same gray suit, the fabric a little worn, my hands folded tightly on my lap. Across from me was the same reporter who'd interviewed me months ago. But now her eyes carried the weight of everything that had happened since. She began quietly. Mr. Walker, if you could say one thing to your son-in-law, who's likely watching right now, what would it be? I took a breath, long and deliberate. I'd tell him I don't hate him. I only regret that I ever trusted him so much I couldn't see the lies eating our family from the inside. The room fell silent. The camera zoomed in. Not for drama, but so people could see the truth written on my face. Real sorrow doesn't need tears. Then the documentary rolled its footage. The forensic videos, the moment Brian was arrested at the bank, the handwritten letter from Margaret verified in court. The narrator's voice echoed softly over the images. In this case, what moved the public wasn't just the forgery itself, but how one man, in his twilight years, rose to protect the moral legacy of the woman he loved. The moment that broke the silence came next. Emily stepped into the studio. She sat beside me, her hands trembling, but her eyes bright, just like when she was little, and used to hold my hand watching fireworks. The reporter asked gently, "Emily, why did you choose to speak publicly tonight?" Emily swallowed hard, her voice cracking, but clear. "Because I don't want anyone to think my father did this for money. He taught me one thing: never let lies win. I was blind for a long time, but now I see. No one deserves to be called family if they build their happiness on deceit." The studio went still. Even through the earpiece, I heard the director whisper, "Hold that shot." 3 minutes later, the feed switched to the other side of town. Brian had demanded the right to respond live. He sat under harsh studio lights, hollow-eyed, the dark circles beneath his eyes deep and raw. "I was set up," he said. "Those documents were staged. My father-in-law is being manipulated by his lawyer. I have proof that Harper took money from one of my business rivals." Behind the cameras, Harper only smiled faintly. She nodded once to the director. Then, on the split screen, a new video began to play. A recording, Brian's own voice. "If you can't win in court, discredit the lawyer. Find something, anything, to smear her name." The recording, recovered from his office during the forensic search, had been approved by the court for public release. The studio erupted. The reporter struggled to regain composure. "Mr. Anderson," she asked carefully, "would you like to explain this recording?" Brian froze. His lips moved, no sound coming out. I don't remember." The camera caught every flicker. The sweat, the darting eyes, the slow collapse of denial. And just like that, the truth, cold, unembellished, was laid bare before millions. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. What I felt was something quieter. Pity. Because even now, faced with the truth, he couldn't stop lying. When the broadcast ended, the internet exploded. Justice for Richard. Walker trended nationwide. Major outlets replayed Emily's statement, calling it the daughter who spoke for truth. Letters poured into the Margaret Walker Foundation. Donations, messages of support, words like, "You've restored my faith in justice." That night, Emily and I sat together on the porch, the glow of TV screens flickering across the street. She took my hand and whispered, "Dad, Mom must be proud." I smiled softly. "No, sweetheart," I said. "She's crying," said, but they're tears of relief. As the church bells rang in the distance and the night wind swept through the trees, I realized something profound. Justice no longer lived just in courtrooms or paperwork. It lived in people's hearts, in every viewer who had seen the truth and finally woken up. After the national broadcast, Brian became a cornered animal. Once hailed as a model businessman, he was now the face of disgrace. Contracts vanished, partners withdrew, his company plunged, but men who've lived off lies don't die quietly. Just a week later, he played his final card. A video. A fake one. It spread faster than fire. Me sitting in a dark room holding a paper saying, "We planned everything from the start to take Brian Anderson down." Every word was a blade. The internet exploded. Headlines screamed, "Leaked video? Did Richard Walker stage his own case?" Comment sections turned to war zones, believers and doubters colliding in real time. That night Harper called. "Stay calm," she said. "We know who did this." "He used AI, didn't he?" I asked. "Yes, it's a deep fake, but proving it takes time. Can you handle a few days of noise?" I laughed softly. "I've lived through war. A few noisy days won't kill me." Harper and Martinez launched a full-scale trace. Within 48 hours, Martinez tracked the source, a small marketing agency in Florida. They'd been paid through an anonymous account, one that, as luck would have it, shared the same IP address tied to Brian's forged estate emails. Harper immediately filed a motion with the court. Intentional dissemination of false information to manipulate ongoing legal proceedings. Meanwhile, the storm raged online. Talk shows argued, analysts debated the clip. Every expert had a different theory. And me? I stayed silent. Sometimes, noise only feeds the fire. What we needed wasn't defense, it was one undeniable strike of truth. 3 days later, Harper got a call from the national network. "They want a live confrontation," she said. "You and Brian, one last time." She hesitated. "Are you sure you want this?" I nodded. "Yes. It started in front of the public. It should end there." Thursday night, 2 chairs, white lights, the whole country watching. Brian walked in, thinner, pale, eyes still burning with defiance. The host began, voice steady. "Tonight we bring both sides together. To end speculation once and for all, Mr. Anderson, you asked to speak first." Brian smirked. "I have proof," he said. "A video." He admitted to setting me up. The public deserves the truth. The screen behind us lit up, the fake video playing in full. I didn't look at it. I waited. When the line, "We planned it from the start," echoed through the studio, Harper raised her hand. "Permission," she said, "to play a parallel forensic analysis from the Federal Digital Crime Division." A split screen appeared. On one side, the fake. On the other, a data overlay. The voice of a forensic expert filled the silence. The primary video shows deepfake indicators, mouth frame offset by 1.2 degrees, eyelid movement unsynced with vocal frequency. Audio waveform matches a 2017 YouTube sample, cut, reprocessed, and resynthesized. The studio went dead quiet. The camera zoomed in on Brian, sweat running down his temple, eyes darting, jaw clenched. The host turned to me. "Mr. Walker, do you have anything you'd like to say?" I faced the lens. My voice was calm, almost gentle. "No one can smear the truth. They can splice, edit, mimic, but what they can't fake is conscience. To anyone watching, if someone you love betrays you, don't stay silent. The truth will always find its own voice." The audience rose in applause, long, thunderous, real. Brian stood, shaking, then walked off without another word. That night, the broadcast shattered records. Over 3 million shares in just a few hours. Headlines filled every screen. Deepfake collapses. Truth triumphs. I exhaled, feeling something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. Emily sat beside me, hand wrapped around mine. Outside, wind rustled through the small plaque on the Margaret Walker Foundation. The porch light glowed against the engraving. "Truth never dies." And I knew this round was over. Not won by rage or revenge, but by the one thing no lie can survive: the light of truth. The morning of the trial, the sky hung heavy and pale. I arrived early. Slow steps, firm and measured. My hand wrapped around the cane Margaret had given me on my 50th birthday. Each tap of its wooden tip echoed down the marble floor, not trembling, not hurried, just a reminder to myself that justice was close. The courtroom was larger than I'd imagined. Every bench was filled. Reporters, neighbors, strangers whose eyes carried both curiosity and pity. In the front row, Emily sat between Harper and Keller. When our eyes met, I saw pride, a quiet light I hadn't seen since Margaret's smile. Then the door opened. Brian walked in with his lawyer. He looked thinner, the hollows under his eyes deeper, his suit hanging loose. But when he saw me, he forced that same crooked smirk, the one he'd always used when he thought he still had control. His lawyer, the silver-haired veteran feared across the circuit, stood first, voice as smooth as silk. Your Honor, we do not deny there were irregularities in the signing process, but there is no evidence of deliberate fraud. At most, this is a misunderstanding, perhaps even a manipulation of an elderly man. Each word was polished, designed to slice away responsibility. I didn't react. I simply waited. Then Harper rose, spine straight, voice clear and precise as a blade. We will prove the opposite, Your Honor. This was not confusion, it was conspiracy, and no one but Brian Anderson orchestrated it. She clicked a remote. The projector flickered to life, emails with identical timestamps, the audio clip where Brian said move the schedule up, and the digital signature logs linking directly to his home IP. Each item landed like a nail in the coffin of his defense. The defense lawyer snapped. Objection. Digital evidence is unverifiable without independent confirmation. Harper didn't blink. Your Honor, the validation is right here. A certification from the Federal Cyber Forensics Bureau signed by the division chief. The judge reviewed the file, his eyes scanning line after line. Then he nodded. Objection overruled. Evidence admitted. The air in the courtroom shifted. Brian began to fidget. Sweat gleamed on his temple. His jaw flexed as he tried to smile. Then came the witnesses. Keller stepped to the stand, shoulders squared like the firefighter he'd once been. His voice was firm, deliberate. He told the story of the night he saw Brian take mail from my box, of the misdelivered contract bearing my forged signature. I've seen plenty of fraud in my 28 years, he said, calm but cutting, but I've never met a man who could lie this much and still call himself the victim. A quiet ripple of laughter moved through the gallery. Next, Harper called the handwriting expert, a woman with silver hair and round glasses, meticulous in every syllable. We compared 47 samples, she explained. Every forged signature shares the same pen lift and reverse stroke, a unique trait identical to that found in Mr. Brian Anderson's own corporate documents. I lowered my head, my fingers tightening around the cane. Margaret used to say, "A lie always leaves fingerprints." She was right. And today, those fingerprints were glowing in the courtroom light. By the time the morning session ended, Brian was still pretending calm, but his hands trembled as he signed the record sheet. When he turned to leave, his eyes met mine, burning with equal parts hatred and fear. Harper placed a steady hand on my shoulder and whispered, "We're halfway there, Richard. This afternoon we bring in the letter, Margaret's letter." I nodded. Outside, sunlight broke through the gray clouds, a beam cutting across the courthouse steps like a blessing from someone long gone. I knew then that this afternoon justice would stop being an idea. It would become real. That afternoon, the courtroom was packed shoulder to shoulder, every bench filled, every breath held. Harper rose slowly, a crimson-sealed envelope in her hand. Her voice rang clear, steady. She didn't need a microphone. Your Honor, the plaintiff submits our final piece of evidence, a handwritten letter by Mrs. Margaret Walker stored in a sealed deposit at First Federal Bank. It was to be opened only in the event of a family dispute over the estate. Every eye turned toward her. Harper handed the envelope to Judge Jenkins. He broke the wax seal carefully, unfolded the yellowed page, and began to read. His voice carried across the courtroom, deliberate and solemn, every word cutting through the silence like scripture. If one day I'm no longer here, and this house becomes the reason for betrayal, then let truth decide. The man I trust most, Richard, will be the sole guardian of our home until Emily is old enough to understand that money can never replace honesty. And if anyone seeks to take what isn't theirs, let justice speak for me. No one moved. You could hear the clock ticking on the back wall. Tick, tick, as if measuring the heartbeat of truth itself. Harper turned to Brian, her voice sharp and cold. Mr. Anderson. The letter bears Mrs. Walker's verified signature, witnessed by two parties and notarized by Bennett Cole. One of those witnesses is present today. A frail woman rose from the back row. It was Cora Bennett, Margaret's former assistant. Her hands trembled, but her voice was clear. I was there when Margaret signed it. She said, "If Richard is ever alone in that house, let this letter protect him." Harper displayed the handwriting analysis, every curve, every slant, identical to Margaret's authenticated samples. Judge Jenkins nodded once. "Enter it into record." Brian's face drained of color. He shot up from his seat, shouting, "This is a setup. You're all in on it. Harper can forge anything she wants." The judge struck his gavel. "Order!" But Brian kept shouting, "It wasn't me. It was Emily. She switched the wills. I was just helping her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Emily froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. My heart clenched. The father in me wanted to shield her, but justice demanded stillness. Harper didn't flinch. She nodded to the bailiff. "Your Honor, please display Exhibit 47, the verified audio recording taken lawfully at Mr. Walker's residence on April 2nd, when the defendant attempted to retrieve forged documents." The speakers crackled. Then Brian's voice, unmistakable, cold, calculating. "Just sign it, Emily. Once it's done, everything's ours. Your father doesn't need to know. I'll handle the rest." The sound of betrayal filled the room. Emily buried her face in her hands. Brian shouted again, desperate, "She set me up! She planted that recording!" The gavel came down 3 times. Crack, crack, crack. "Enough!" Judge Jenkins thundered. "Mr. Anderson, you have just confirmed your own voice on that tape. The court acknowledges your admission." Brian's attorney went pale. He stared down, defeated. Words gone. I said nothing. I just looked at Brian, the man who once called me Dad, who once sat at my table, shared my bread. Now standing there, eyes wild, caught in a net woven by his own deceit. Harper placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to say a word, Richard. The letter and the recording, they speak for themselves." I nodded, but inside the victory felt hollow, heavy with sorrow. I never wanted him destroyed. I only wanted him to stop. But lies don't stop, not until they collapse completely. Judge Jenkins surveyed the courtroom, voice ringing like a final bell. "The court will deliver its verdict tomorrow morning. Until then, the defendant, Brian Anderson, is remanded into custody to prevent tampering with evidence." The bailiffs approached. Brian turned, eyes blazing with hate and fear. "You win," he hissed. I met his gaze, my voice calm. "No, Brian, truth wins, not me." The doors closed behind him with a heavy thud. Emily rushed to me, sobbing into my chest. I stroked her hair gently and whispered, "It's almost over, sweetheart." "And your mother?" I looked up at the faint sunlight breaking through the courthouse glass. "She's smiling now." The next morning the sky was impossibly blue. I sat on the cold wooden bench, both hands wrapped around my old cane. The echo of police boots on the marble floor grew louder. Then the courtroom doors opened. Brian walked in, wrists loosely cuffed, eyes hollow. Gone was the smirk, the arrogance, the veneer of control. What remained was just a man crushed beneath the weight of truth. Judge Jenkins entered moments later. His gaze swept the room, calm, grave, almost sorrowful. He looked like a man who knew that in family wars, no one truly wins. He cleared his throat, voice resonant yet heavy. "The District Court of Montgomery County, having reviewed all presented evidence, the witness testimonies, handwriting analyses, digital forensics, and verified recordings, hereby rules as follows. The defendant, Brian Anderson, is found guilty of forgery of notarized documents, organized financial fraud, and attempted unlawful seizure of property belonging to Mr. Richard A. Walker." The words fell into the silence like stones into water. I could hear my own heartbeat, deep, slow, almost mournful. The court sentences Brian Anderson to 12 years in state prison. The defendant is ordered to repay the full amount misappropriated, as well as additional civil damages. All assets belonging to Mr. Richard A. Walker shall be safeguarded and transferred to the Margaret Walker Foundation, under his direction, and with oversight from the local financial authority. Harper placed a quiet hand on my shoulder. She didn't need to say anything. Her nod was enough. Emily sat beside me, head bowed, her tears falling onto my clasped hands. Judge Jenkins paused, his tone softening. The court also wishes to acknowledge the extraordinary resolve of the plaintiff, a father who sought justice not through vengeance but through the law. This was more than a civil case. It was a lesson in honesty and a reminder of what family should mean. From the back row, a single clap echoed, then another. Soon, the entire courtroom rose in a standing ovation. It wasn't applause for victory, it was for truth. I looked around. Faces that once doubted me now shone with quiet respect. Keller stood tall at the rear, saluting me like a soldier honoring a flag. Brian remained motionless, head lowered. When the guards came to escort him out, he turned once, eyes empty, yet desperate. He seemed to want to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe just one last lie. I met his stare, calm and steady. Some words, I thought, come too late to matter. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed the corridor. One pushed forward, microphone raised. "Mr. Walker, how does it feel, now that justice is finally on your side?" I took a breath. "I don't feel like I've won anything," I said quietly. "I just feel lighter. Because at last the truth is where it belongs. And maybe now, Margaret can rest in peace." Harper smiled faintly. Emily squeezed my hand. "Dad," she whispered, voice breaking, "I'm proud of you." I brushed a tear from her cheek. "No, sweetheart. I'm proud of you, for having the courage to see things clearly." When we stepped outside, sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps, golden and warm, as if the world itself had exhaled. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, but their noise felt far away. All I heard was the sound of the wind, clean and free. On the steps, Harper leaned close. "Would you like me to release a statement to the press?" I smiled. "Just tell them this. Justice doesn't need hatred. It only needs time and truth." We walked away in silence. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, church bells tolled, long and low. I looked up, and across the morning sky stretched a thin white cloud, curved like Margaret's signature, soft, proud, unforgettable. In that moment, I knew the trial hadn't just closed a case. It had closed a chapter of my life. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely free. 3 months after the verdict, autumn had returned. Every morning, I walked to the church where Margaret used to sing, not to pray for myself, but to find a little silence among the rustling leaves. Justice had been served, yet peace still felt far away. The headlines faded, but Brian Anderson's name didn't. He was no longer the visionary entrepreneur. Now he was the symbol of greed and betrayal. Old puff pieces vanished from the internet, replaced by investigations detailing his collapse. Assets seized, company bankrupt, investors suing, his house foreclosed. Harper sent me the final court report. 85% of the defendant's personal assets have been liquidated. The restitution payment has been transferred to the Margaret Walker Foundation. She added a handwritten note. "It's over. You can rest now." But how does one rest after something like this? Every time I heard the church bells, I saw him again. Brian, in handcuffs, eyes blank, hollow. I didn't pity him, and I didn't rejoice either. Defeating a liar doesn't bring victory. It leaves an emptiness, like burying a piece of your own past that once felt real. Emily, though, found her own way to heal. After the trial, she cut all ties with Brian. She sold their apartment, moved back in with me, and began volunteering for the Margaret Walker Foundation. Each morning, I'd watch her carry meals to orphaned children, her face calm now, no longer haunted. One day I asked, "Do you hate him?" She paused, then softly, "I don't have the energy to hate anymore, Dad. I just want to live. For Mom." Across town, Brian began to pay, in ways no sentence could measure. Harper kept me updated through short clinical messages, each one slicing a little deeper. Transferred to solitary for his own safety. Assigned to kitchen cleanup duty. Refused visitors. He scrubbed cafeteria floors, washed metal trays, stood in line for dry bread and cold soup. During a medical review, the prison doctor noted, "Patient displays insomnia and signs of paranoid anxiety, believes he's being watched." A month later, he was moved to psychiatric observation. One guard told Harper that at night, Brian screamed Margaret's name in his sleep. The woman he'd never met, yet whose name he had forged to steal everything she stood for. Perhaps for the first time in his life, Brian was facing himself. Stripped of money, stripped of status, stripped even of the wedding ring he once wore like a charm of legitimacy. I didn't feel satisfaction reading those reports, only a quiet ache. Some punishments don't come from the court. They come from the silence that greets you when there's no one left to lie to. Then, one morning, Harper called. Her voice was gentle, hesitant. "Richard, Brian has requested to see you." I froze. "For what?" "He says he wants to apologize." I didn't answer. Harper waited, then added quietly, "You don't have to go. No one expects you to. But sometimes forgiveness isn't for them. It's for you. So you can finally sleep." Her words stayed with me all day. Forgiveness so you can sleep. That night, when Emily had gone to bed, I sat at my desk and opened an old photo album. Margaret's smile, Emily as a child, her hair in braids, and Brian, on his wedding day, radiant, confident, eyes full of belief. I exhaled, long and slow. Time takes everything, wealth, strength, youth, but not the ache of knowing that, no matter who was right or wrong, this had always been a tragedy born from family. The next morning, I wrote a short note to Harper. Arrange the meeting, just once, because some doors don't close until you've found the courage to walk through them. That morning, the sky was the color of old steel. I drove 2 hours to Franklin Prison, where Brian was serving his sentence. The gates opened with a heavy groan, the sound of iron scraping stone, dry and final. The guard checked my papers. "Richard Walker?" I nodded. "The inmate Anderson's been waiting for you since dawn." They led me down a corridor that smelled of disinfectant and rust. Each door slammed behind us with a metallic echo, each one sounding to me like a chapter of the past being sealed shut. In the visitation room there were 2 chairs, a smudged glass partition, and a phone bolted to the wall. I sat down. Moments later, Brian entered. I almost didn't recognize him. He was gaunt, hollow-eyed, hair shaved close to the scalp. His prison uniform hung loose, colorless, as though the very fabric had given up. When he saw me, he hesitated, then sat, lifted the receiver. "I didn't think you'd come," he rasped. "I wasn't sure I would," I said, keeping my eyes on him. "But I needed to end this. For both of us." He gave a crooked smile. "End this. Yeah, I've lost everything. Money, pride, freedom. You happy now?" I shook my head. "I didn't come to celebrate. I came to hear the truth. Once, if you still have the courage for it." He stared at the scratched table for a long time. Then his voice came low and unsteady. "At first I didn't plan it, honestly. I just wanted to prove to Emily that I could take care of her. That I wasn't the son-in-law living off her father's charity. But then I saw the money, the opportunity, and I told myself it was just a loan, that I'd fix it later. But money has a smell, you know. Sweet at first. Then it rots. It crawled into my head and I lost control." I said nothing. Each word he spoke felt like a slow nail driven into memory. "When you started to suspect," he went on, "I panicked. I wasn't afraid of being caught. I was afraid Emily would find out. I thought if you stayed quiet long enough I could make it right. But when you went public, I fought back like a cornered animal, and every lie needed another lie to keep it alive, until I didn't even know what was real anymore." His voice cracked. I saw his hands tremble, the same hands that had once signed forged documents now curling like they wanted to hide. He whispered, "You know what I regret most? Not the prison, not the money. It's that day in court, when Emily looked at me and said nothing. The way she looked at me, like I'd never existed." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes through the glass. "You can't reclaim the past, Brian, but you can still choose what to do with what's left, even inside those walls." He looked up, his voice shaking. "Can you forgive me?" The question hung between us, weightless and heavy at once. I closed my eyes. Forgiveness, not for him, but for myself. To stop dragging this burden through every waking hour. When I spoke, my voice was slow, measured. "I can't forget, but I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I need peace." Brian bowed his head. His shoulders trembled. I couldn't tell if he was crying or simply collapsing under his own remorse. "Thank you," he whispered. For coming. No one else has. The guard motioned. Time was up. I stood, placed my hand against the cold glass, not as comfort, but as farewell. He lifted his head and tried to smile. It was small, crooked, human. Redeem yourself, Brian, I said quietly. No one else can do it for you. Then I turned and walked away. The door slammed shut behind me, echoing down the corridor like the last toll of a bell. Outside, the autumn wind hit my face. I looked up. The clouds were thinning, the sun breaking through in pale threads. I couldn't tell if what I felt was relief or emptiness, only that for the first time I could take a breath without the weight pressing on my chest, because perhaps forgiveness doesn't change the past, but it's the only thing that frees us from being its prisoner. 2 weeks after that prison visit, I returned to an ordinary life, one so simple and quiet it startled me. Every morning I brewed a cup of black coffee, opened the window to let the breeze in, and listened to the neighborhood children laughing outside. The house, once a battlefield of lies and suspicion, had finally become what it was always meant to be, a home. On the wall, I hung back our wedding photo, the same one Margaret insisted on framing decades ago. Brian once said, "That picture's ancient, Dad. You should replace it with a digital one." But standing there now, I realized, the old things endure precisely because they were built to. Emily kept working at the Margaret Walker Foundation. Every morning she stopped by with a roll of bread and a cup of tea, her eyes bright again. She told me about the children whose school fees the foundation had covered, about the single mothers rebuilding their lives. There was a new gentleness in her voice, a peace I hadn't heard in years. "Dad," she said one sunny afternoon, "if Mom were here, she'd be so happy." I smiled. "Not just happy, sweetheart," I said. "She'd be proud." That evening I drove to the cemetery where Margaret rested. The sky was clear, the maples turning crimson under the fading light. I brought her favorite flowers, white chrysanthemums, and sat by her stone. The inscription read, "Here rests Margaret Walker, a woman who believed in truth, love, and grace." I whispered, "You see, Maggie, it's done. I kept the house, yes. But more than that, I kept my promise to you." The wind stirred. A single leaf broke loose, landing softly on my hand, light as a touch. I smiled. No words were needed. She was there, in the air, in the light, in the home we built together. That night, when I returned, a small envelope waited at my door. It was from Harper. Inside was a folded newspaper clipping. "Brian Anderson joins volunteer labor program inside Franklin Prison." The article was short, just a few paragraphs. It said that, after weeks of therapy, Brian had applied for work in the prison woodshop. He'd asked to join a charity project making wooden toys for orphans, a collaboration that ironically included the Margaret Walker Foundation. The warden was quoted, "He doesn't say much, but every day he sands the wood carefully and carves the same words into each toy, for those who deserve a better life." I read that line again and again. For those who deserve a better life. I didn't know if it was real remorse or just another way for him to feel human again, but I knew this. Even the smallest step in darkness is still a step toward light. I folded the paper neatly and placed it beside Margaret's photo. "I guess," I said softly, as if she could hear me, "in the end, everyone learns their lesson in their own time. Some just learn it too late." That night I sat on the porch beneath a sky scattered with stars. Emily joined me, resting a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Dad," she asked, "do you ever regret taking it to court?" I thought for a while, then shook my head. "No, because if I hadn't, I couldn't have taught you the most important thing. There's no peace built on a lie." She smiled faintly, leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat there in silence, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. Somewhere far away, behind thick prison walls, maybe Brian was hearing something similar, the scrape of sandpaper, the hum of saws, and the distant laughter of children whose lives his hands were now helping in some small, broken way. I felt no anger, only peace, a quiet peace that comes not from victory, but from release. In my journal that night, I wrote, "Justice doesn't end in a courtroom. It ends when the heart stops needing to hate." And on the final page I added one last line, for myself, for Margaret, and for every soul ever wounded by deceit. Forgiveness doesn't make us weak. It makes us free. Winter nights in Franklin were colder than I'd imagined. The wind howled through the bars, making the steel sing like a dying machine. My cell was small, one bed, one bulb, one silence that never slept. I was no longer the man I once pretended to be, no longer the polished businessman with the perfect smile, no longer the man who thought he could lie his way into respect. Each night I woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering. In dreams I saw Richard's living room again, his trembling hand holding Margaret's letter, and Emily's eyes meeting mine. Not angry, not crying, just empty. The kind of emptiness that says, "You no longer exist." The nightmares came like clockwork. Once I dreamed Margaret herself stood in the doorway, white dress, calm face, eyes steady. Her voice was soft but sharp as glass. "Why did you use my name to do wrong?" I wanted to kneel, to beg her forgiveness, but in the dream my mouth wouldn't open. When I woke, the pillow was damp with tears. Days in prison blurred into sameness, sweeping floors, sanding wood, clearing trash. At first I hated the work. It felt beneath me. But over time I realized it was exactly what I deserved. Each toy I carved for the orphanage program was a reminder. Every smiling face I heard through the radio, a small knife turning in my chest. I'd once stolen smiles from others. Now I worked to give them back, one splinter at a time. Sometimes, during the long noon breaks, I'd sit in the yard, stare at the sky, and watch the birds flying beyond the walls. I'd ask myself, if I could go back, would I stop before signing Richard's name? The truth? I didn't know, because back then greed had already drowned whatever conscience I had left. Then one afternoon, during mail distribution, a guard handed me a small envelope with no sender. Inside was a single note, handwritten, "Redeem yourself through action, not through tears." R.W. I stared at those letters, R.W., until my eyes blurred. Only 3 initials, but they hit harder than any sentence. Richard had written them. No hatred, no comfort, just truth, clean, sharp, and final. That night, I borrowed paper and pen from the workshop. My hands shook as I wrote, uneven, uncertain, so unlike the confident signature I once used to forge his name. Dear Emily, if you're reading this, it means I still have a place, however small, in your memory. I don't ask for forgiveness. Some wounds don't heal, and maybe they shouldn't. I only want you to know that everything began with good intentions, and ended where selfishness took over. I remember the way you looked at me that day in court. That look hurt more than any sentence. It told me I'd already lost you long before the police took me away. I won't ask to see you. I only hope that someday you'll live freely, love fearlessly, and never be afraid to trust again. I folded the letter but didn't send it. It stayed in my drawer, buried beneath curls of wood and dust, because deep down I knew Emily wasn't ready to read it, and maybe I wasn't ready to be heard. A few weeks later I wrote another, this time to Richard. I once thought I understood justice, that it was about power, about who wins and who loses. Now I see it's about facing what you've done and choosing to live with it. You were right. I have to redeem myself. And I'm trying. Every toy I carve, I imagine it going to the Margaret Walker Foundation. I don't need my name on it. I only want each one to stand as proof that a man once lost himself and tried to find his way back. I don't know how many years I have left, but if I ever walk out of here, I'll come to you, not to ask for anything, just to bow my head. I sign my name and ask the guard to send it. 3 days later, I was called to the warden's office. He placed a letter on the desk, the postmark from Montgomery. Inside was a small slip of paper, a single line. If you're truly making things right, don't stop. No signature. But I recognized Harper's handwriting. Richard's lawyer. For the first time in months, I smiled. That night, I sat in the yard watching the moon rise above the walls. The pale light spilled across the dirt, catching on the scattered wood shavings, tiny fragments shining like fallen stars. I whispered to the wind, "Margaret, if you can hear me, tell them I finally understand. I lost, but maybe, for the first time, I've become something closer to human." The chapel bell rang somewhere in the distance, a soft metallic chime drifting through the cold. Brian lifted his head. the faintest smile breaking through his exhaustion, and for a fleeting moment the man who once drowned in lies felt, at last, a spark of peace. After receiving Harper's note, something in Brian shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically. It was slow, steady, like the last flicker of a candle that refuses to die in the wind. He requested a transfer to the prison's charity workshop, where inmates made wooden toys for children in need. Every day he sat at a small workbench, knife trembling slightly in his hand. New calluses grew on the same fingers that once held gold pens and signed forged contracts. At first the other inmates laughed. "A businessman carving toy horses?" one jeered. Brian only smiled and replied quietly, "We're all learning to be human again. I'm just catching up." He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. He simply worked, hour after hour, day after day, until tiny cars, horses, and wooden blocks began to fill the shelves. And beneath each piece he carved the same line, always in small, careful letters: "For those who deserve a better life." One afternoon a guard asked him, "Who do you think will ever read that?" Brian looked up and said, "I don't know. Maybe a child who'll never know my name, but who'll still feel that somewhere, someone wanted to make things right." Nights were still hard. Sleep rarely came. In the dark, he heard Emily's voice again. "I just wanted to protect us." Then Richard's silence from the courtroom bench, and Margaret's voice in his dreams, soft, patient, but unyielding. "You can't keep running, Brian. Forgiveness isn't something others give you. It begins when you stop lying to yourself." He'd wake drenched in sweat, gasping, the echo of her words still ringing. Sometimes he'd go to the yard, sit under the pale moon, and stare at the sky through the iron bars. The moon was the same one that had watched him when he was free. He just hadn't looked up back then. One February afternoon, the prison received a shipment from various charities. Brian volunteered to unload the boxes. When he reached the last crate, he froze. Stamped on the side, clear as day, "Margaret Walker Foundation." His hand trembled. On top of the box sat a batch of toys, the same ones he had carved weeks earlier, returned for inspection before distribution. He picked one up and traced the words he'd written himself: "For those who deserve a better life." A lump rose in his throat, pride and pain tangled into one. That night he wrote another letter, this one addressed to the foundation, unsigned. "If these toys can make even one child smile, then perhaps I've repaired a small corner of what I broke." Weeks later, a plain envelope arrived. No return address, no seal. Inside was a single photograph. A group of children grinning, each holding one of his toys. In the corner, handwritten in delicate cursive, were just two words. They smiled. E. Brian sat there for a long time, the photo trembling in his hands. Evening light spilled through the bars, washing the children's faces in gold. He didn't need to ask who E was. One letter was enough. His heart shuddered. Not from guilt this time, but from something far rarer. Forgiveness. Not spoken, not written, but given, silently, through the laughter of strangers. From that day forward, he worked harder than anyone. He taught new inmates how to carve, stayed late to finish shipments, and personally checked each box bound for the foundation. When someone asked him why, he said simply, "Because I still owe something to a woman who's gone, and to a man who forgave me anyway." Years slipped by. His hair turned silver, but where arrogance once lived, there was now a quiet clarity, a faint, honest light. One afternoon during a break, Brian told the guard, "You know, I used to think hell was a place where people were punished." The guard raised an eyebrow. "And now?" Brian smiled. "Now I think hell is living with your own mistakes, and never being able to forget them." The guard nodded. "And where are you now?" Brian exhaled softly. "Maybe halfway out of hell." That spring, the Margaret Walker Foundation received its largest shipment yet from Franklin Prison. Harper wrote a short letter to Richard. "You see, the circle has closed. The man who once betrayed you is now helping children smile." Richard folded the letter with a faint smile and looked toward Margaret's photo. "You see that, Maggie?" he whispered. "Goodness can come late, but it still comes." And beyond the prison walls, Brian sat at his bench, carving one last line into a tiny wooden toy. For Emily. For forgiveness. The light of dusk poured through the window, tracing his thin silhouette on the wall, worn but at peace. In that moment he understood. The court's verdict might have ended his sentence, but the real redemption, the one written in the heart, only ends when a man has the courage to face his sins and live each day trying to make them right. The summer after it all ended, the lavender in front of the house bloomed again. I was nearly 70 by then, yet still woke up early each morning, brewed my coffee, and stepped out to the porch, where sunlight fell on the wooden sign that read, Margaret Walker Foundation, Truth Never Dies. The house that had once been a battlefield was now the heart of something new, a small, bustling home for kindness. Inside, Emily sat amid stacks of papers and donation boxes. She wasn't the torn, grieving daughter I once saw caught between husband and father. Now she was the director, steady, confident, smiling in a way that reminded me more and more of her mother. In the mornings, Emily liked to play soft classical music on the radio. Sometimes she'd pause, gaze out at the garden, and whisper, Dad, I think Mom's listening with us. I never answered, just smiled, because deep down, I felt the same. We traveled across the state together, opening new branches of the foundation, places where children could receive books, toys, and school supplies. Every item was carefully checked before shipment, but there was one detail that always made me stop and linger. Beneath each small wooden toy, carved faintly into the grain, were the same familiar words. For those who deserve a better life. I knew who carved them. Brian. And no, I didn't feel bitterness anymore. When I saw those words, I only felt a quiet understanding. Even sin, when faced with truth, can still become a seed for something good, if a person has the courage to stop running. One afternoon, Harper visited. She placed a folder on the table. The foundation's been nominated for this year's State Humanitarian Award, she said with a grin. I submitted your name, and Emily's. I laughed. I'm just an old man who tells stories and grows tomatoes. Harper shook her head gently. And that's exactly why people believe you. That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone on the porch. The moon rose slow and golden, painting the garden in silver light. I opened my old journal, the same one I'd written in after the trial years ago. The last line I'd written then read, Justice doesn't end with a verdict. It continues in how we choose to live afterward. Tonight, I added one more line beneath it. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's being able to look back at the pain and no longer tremble. In the yard, Emily turned on the porch lights. Her laughter carried through the warm night air, mingling with the song of crickets. Life, after all the storms, had found its peace again. Not the fragile kind born of silence, but a peace built from tears, truth, and grace. I looked up at the sky and whispered softly, Thank you, Maggie. You taught me that truth may hurt, but only truth can set us free. 2 years later, the Margaret Walker Foundation had grown into a nationwide network of hope. From a small house on Maple Street, it had become a movement. Hundreds of volunteers, thousands of children receiving scholarships, and countless families rebuilding their lives. Emily traveled from city to city, carrying our story as a message. Truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. Each time she spoke about her mother, her voice trembled, but not from grief anymore, from pride. And every time she finished a speech, the crowd would rise in silence, as if they too could feel Margaret's presence somewhere among them. As for me, I stayed mostly at the main office, our old home now transformed into a community space. My task was simple, writing thank you letters to donors. I wrote them all by hand. Harper once told me, handwriting touches the heart. She was right. One early autumn afternoon, I was signing letters when the receptionist came in. Mr. Walker, she said softly. Someone's here to see you. From Franklin Prison. I froze. My heart gave a single, heavy thud. A moments later, a man in a prison officer's uniform stepped in. Middle-aged, gentle-faced, his voice calm and deliberate. My name is Samuel Hayes, he said. I represent the inmate rehabilitation program at Franklin. I came to deliver a gift. He placed a small wooden box on my desk, beautifully carved, smooth to the touch. When I ran my fingers across the lid, I recognized the texture, the precision of the lines. Carved on top were 2 simple words, for forgiveness. Samuel continued quietly. It's the last piece Brian Anderson made in the workshop before he passed away last month. Heart failure. He asked that, if possible, it be delivered to you and to Miss Emily. For a moment the room went still. I lifted the lid. Inside was a small wooden boat, the bow etched with a single phrase. Truth can drown you, but only forgiveness lets you float again. My hands trembled. Emily stepped into the room just then, stopping at the sight of me holding the tiny boat. Samuel's voice softened. He said this was for the man who helped him find his way back. Silence filled the space. Emily came closer, rested her hand gently on my shoulder. Dad, she whispered, he's found his peace. I nodded, tears finally spilling down my face. Not tears of pity, but of release. Because at last, the long storm that bound us all had ended not in bitterness, but in grace. We decided to place Brian's wooden boat in the Foundation's glass display case, right beside Margaret's photograph. Below it, a small plaque read, "For those who believe that compassion can be reborn from wrongdoing." A year later, the Margaret Walker Foundation received the Hope Legacy Award for Outstanding Community Impact. During the ceremony, Emily walked onto the stage, holding that same little boat. Her voice was clear, steady, filled with quiet conviction. This gift came from a man who once lost his way. But it was he, not us, who reminded the world that redemption is the purest form of truth. The audience rose in applause. I looked at my daughter, my vision blurring through tears. And in that thunder of clapping hands, I could almost hear Margaret's gentle whisper weaving through the crowd. You see, Richard, in the end, the light always finds its way back. I lifted my eyes toward the stage lights, which shimmered over the little wooden boat in Emily's hands. It gleamed softly, as if sailing across a calm, endless sea, carrying with it every ounce of pain, forgiveness, and love that had ever lived in our story. That night, after the award ceremony, I stayed behind in the silent auditorium. The stage lights still glowed faintly, casting their warmth over the little wooden boat, Brian's final gift. I turned it slowly in my hands, listening to the soft whisper of wind against the glass windows. Outside, the city pulsed with life. People moved on. The world kept turning. But for me, time seemed to stand still. I wanted to remember this moment forever. For years I had gone from being a father betrayed to a man standing before the law to someone who finally learned how to forgive. And through that journey I discovered something. Victory isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about who has the courage to let go of hatred and walk forward unburdened. I thought of Margaret, the woman who taught me that love doesn't need to be perfect, only genuine. I thought of Emily, my daughter, who once lost her faith in people, only to rediscover it through compassion. And yes, I thought of Brian, the man who brought me to my knees, but also taught me the truest lesson about redemption. I looked up at the ceiling lights, where reflections shimmered like ripples on water. And in that quiet glow, I spoke. Not to anyone else, but to myself. Richard, you've come full circle. Now let it rest. The past has said its piece. The present, it's for living, for loving, for believing that people can change. The next morning, Emily and I drove to the riverbank where Margaret used to sit and read. The water sparkled under the morning sun. I placed Brian's little wooden boat on the surface. It drifted gently, carried by the current. Emily watched, her voice soft. Where do you think it'll go, Dad? I smiled. To where it belongs, like every soul that's learned to repent and forgive. We sat there in silence, watching the small boat glide farther downstream until it became just a dot on the shining water. And in that golden light, I felt it. Margaret's presence, calm and near. Our family's long, painful journey had finally found peace. I stood up, took Emily's hand, and said quietly, You know, sweetheart, family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, forgiveness, and the choice to stay, even after the hurt. Truth can be cruel, but only truth keeps love pure. Emily nodded, tears glinting at the corners of her smile. She hugged me tightly. I'll keep the foundation alive, Dad, she whispered. Not to remind people of pain, but to show them that even in darkness, there's always a chance to begin again. I looked out at the horizon. The wooden boat was barely visible now, a speck of light floating on the wide, endless river. And to anyone who might one day hear our story, I whispered, if you've ever been betrayed or lost your faith in others, remember this. Truth won't break you. It will shape you. Choose forgiveness, not for them, but for your own soul. because what I've told you is just one of many stories life keeps hidden. And if you stay, I promise the stories that follow will make you believe even more in the power of truth. Subscribe, stay with me. Sometimes a true story can change the way you see your entire life.